Hello YouTube! Hope you're having a brilliant day. I'm James Bell and this is my new series of album reviews. So you'll remember last year I started doing album reviews, but I didn't do that many and a few of you really enjoyed them. So I thought, well, when I've got the time, I will start doing a new series of album reviews and do one each week. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. So I've just finished my third year of university. My goodness. And I am now back home in native Northumberland. And I am in what is going to be my studio. It's very exciting. So at the moment, it is not much. There is a lot of stuff everywhere, as you can see. I get a nice view out the window though, don't I? There's a lot of stuff everywhere. But however, you know, I will get there. So week by week you will see this space transformed into something usable, into a studio space where I will be composing. So keep tuning in and you'll see it gradually transform. Anyway, enough of that. On with the review, and this is the first in the series. So here it is, and today we're doing 10cc original soundtrack. Now this came out in 1975 and I think this is just, it must be one of the best 10cc albums. It's just so good and so experimental, and I think even just this cover, I mean I've got the vinyl here and I love this cover. I don't know about you, this is hand drawn and it was drawn by Humphrey Ocean. And you can see we've got like a cowboy in the middle here. We've got a hand, and it's kind of, I don't know if it's a hand or if it's a rubber glove, but it's got a screw in it, and I've just noticed that. It's got a screw. I don't know if you can see, it's got a screw right there. We've got all these film equipment, so it does suggest something quite filmic about this album. And on the back, again, we've got another rubber glovey sort of hand thing. We've got a film reel here, or it could be a reel-to-reel tape, don't know. Probably film reel, filmic. And then on some editions of vinyl, like this one, and this is what I love about vinyl, it's just so tangible, isn't it? Like you can, you know, this is what you don't get with digital, is you don't get this tangibility as such, especially with the artwork, you can't see it in detail. And as we open it up, we get this. Oh, isn't this lovely? So we've got a picture of the band here. So here we've got, we've got, I don't know if you can see this very well. Here we go. We've got Eric Stewart, that's Graham Goldsman, that's Lol Cream, and that's Kevin Godley. And the sleeve design, it was by Hypnosis, and who did a lot of them in the 70s. And I actually borrowed a book recently from the library about 70s album covers, because this was the period when they really realised how important they were, not just for marketing and telling people what they were, but to also make them look really cool. They were part of the artistic statement, part of the album, and that fitted very well definitely into that idea of a concept album, which is what a lot of these albums were trying to do. So Hypnosis were very much at the forefront of that. So yes, and also with this album came this. Let me grab it. It is a lyric sheet, and again very nicely designed. We've got a pair of sunglasses there. And on the back, again, same again, but yeah, the different lyrics. Now, what can I say about this album? So it was released in 1975, and this was 10cc's third album. I had to think there. They had their original title track album, then sheet music. And when they got to going to work on this album, they were broke. And they needed to sign to a new contract that would allow them to get some more funds, basically. So they looked around and they thought about signing to Virgin, And they were quite enthusiastic for doing that, both them and Richard Branson. But Virgin Records by this point were still quite small. They only had one success, and that was Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. So in the end, they didn't end up signing to Virgin Records. They ended up signing to Philips Phonogram under the Mercury Records label, and it's on here somewhere. There it is, Mercury Records. And they, when they contacted them, they were like, well, we need to sign to a new label. Come down and, you can have a listen to what we did, to what we do. And they listened to probably the most famous 10cc track that's featured on this album, and that was I'm Not in Love. And Philips Phonogram were like, yes, we want you. So they were signed to Philips Phonogram. So this was recorded in their studio, Strawberry Studios. And again, what's so special about 10cc is that it was made up of two sides. So you had Graham and Eric on one side, who were the sort of traditionalist songwriters of the group. Graham had worked on songs like Bus Stop before for the Hollies. That's how he started. And then on the other side, you had Kevin and Lol, who went on to direct a number of music videos in the 1980s. And they were very much artsy and coming up with all these creative ideas. So you had this really, really unusual balance, and it meant that the work they produced had a really good mix of things that were accessible to everyone, but yet still very adventurous and very unique. So I think the original soundtrack comes in the middle of this kind of working relationship, and it's, again, all the songs on it are very adventurous. The first one is definitely the most artsy of them all, and it's One Night in Paris. And I've got to say, it really is, 10cc has a lot of similarities to Queen. And I think One Night in Paris does definitely remind me of Bohemian Rhapsody in a lot of ways. It tells a story. It's very much, again, coming back into this kind of filmic concept of the album. It comes into telling a story about an American tourist in Paris who gets swindled. He ends up in a brothel of all places. It's a bit crazy. And they characterize all these different characters a bit like Bohemian Rhapsody and have all these really interesting harmonies and all these different melodic ideas. And I think it's just such a strong opening for the album. It's actually in 3 parts, One Night in Paris, and it's about 9 minutes long. So it's this really, really big opening, and it always makes me giggle when I put it on. It's just I love the line, "It's the way the croissant crumbles after all." I just think that's such a funny line. But then, after One Night in Paris, we then get I'm Not in Love. And I hope everyone listening to this review has heard this song, because this song really is something. The words fail me to describe this song. Now, originally, I'm Not in Love had been written as a bossa nova by Eric Stewart and Graham Goldman. And they recorded a version of this song just using guitar, drum and bass, so an acoustic version. And when they played it to Kevin and Lol, they didn't really like it. They were like, well, it's a bit dull, there's nothing much to it. So they scrapped it and worked on the rest of the album. And then they got back to this song and they thought, well, because all the staff members had been singing this song, so they thought, well, we need to do something with it, because I think they thought, well, it's obviously catchy, it's obviously memorable. So they said, well, we've got to do something interesting with it. And what they decided to do was to do it with voices. And they recorded themselves singing a note over and over again and making up the different notes in a chord. And then once they'd done this, they laid them all up and then had each chord assigned to a different fader, I believe, on the mixing desk. Now, what's fascinating about this is that this is way before digital technology came to the forefront in music recording and music production. They had to use tape loops, which so that the notes didn't run out, it was continuous. So this was way before sampling. I mean, you can do these kind of effects in Ableton Live fairly easily now. It was very difficult to do that kind of thing back then. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it's just so atmospheric. And they also recorded a sort of acoustic guitar track and bass on top of the voices. And I think they thought when they'd finished the track they would get rid of these, but when they did it and they'd recorded all the parts, they didn't want to touch it because they thought, we don't want to ruin what we've got because this is something special. And it's like no other song out there. It really isn't. The lyrics themselves kind of reflect upon being in denial almost. I think they got the inspiration from one of their spouses saying, "Oh, well, you don't tell me you love me often enough." And they said, well, if I said it, then, it wouldn't mean anything if I said it too much. So they wrote this song from that and saying, well, I'm not in love, and I'm not in love because of this, and it's all these reasons that clearly signpost that actually I am in love and I'm just in absolute denial over it. But the most haunting part has got to be in the middle, where they got their receptionist to come through into the studio and to whisper the words, "Be quiet, big boys don't cry." And I think that is just such a magical moment in the song that kind of sums up why he wants to be in denial over this. Like, it gives a sense of character, and again, I think that fits into the whole filmic theme of the album, and it's wonderful. I think it's one of these songs, and there's not many songs out there, but it's one of these songs that when you finish listening to it, it has this really long outro as well, and you can hear, I think it's a musical box chiming as it fades out, and it's one of these songs that I do have tears in my eyes when I listen to it, because it's just so atmospheric. It's really such a beautiful song, and definitely the standout song in the album. Going on from that, it then breaks that atmosphere completely with Blackmail, which again finishes off the A-side quite nicely. It just really, it kind of goes back into that kind of fun kind of song that 10cc is great at doing. I love the lyrics in this. She doesn't need money. She doesn't need diamonds. She's looking for pretty things. She doesn't want romance. She doesn't need finance. She's looking for rendezvous, but every time she's going down, she never looks around. I'll wait and watch with my lens until she brings the curtain down. I think that, they're just such great lyrics, and I think it's a great way to break the atmosphere from the last song, which is so powerful, into something that, again, is about relationships, but is something somewhat more light-hearted. Onto the B-side. I've flipped my lyric sheet. Onto the B-side now. I think the two tracks on this that I love the most are definitely, firstly, Life as a Minestrone is a very interesting track. It came about, and I think we've all been in this situation, where you're listening to the radio and you mishear something and you're like, did they just say that? I've done it loads. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm clearly not the only one who's done this. And they were sitting in the car, 10cc, and they heard this on the radio. They heard someone say, one of them interpreted the words as, life is a minestrone. And I think that's quite a good saying in a way, because, I think like minestrone, life is made up of lots of different things. It's made up of the good and the bad and the ugly. And it's just such a good allegory for life, isn't it? Life is a minestrone. And again, the lyrics in this, it's quite a sort of carefree song, and it's really one that brings a smile to the face. I'm leaning on the White House lawn, sipping tea by the Taj Mahal at dawn, hanging round the gardens of Babylon. Minnie Mouse has got it all sewn up. She gets more fan mail than the Pope. She takes a mickey out of all my phobias, like singing checks to ward off double pneumonia. I have no idea what that means, but it kind of it's such a kind of mixed up song, but at the same time you kind of understand what it's trying to drive at, and kind of the different randomness of life and how it's all mixed up, and all these lyrics seem jumbled, but it does seem to be kind of sharing snippets of memories perhaps from different points in a life. So I find that song very interesting. It's such a great song. I love it. And then the Film of My Love, which ends the album. And again, this is just a really nice sort of, and it's taking inspiration from like a sort of an Italian serenade almost. And it's just a lovely way to finish the album with a final flourish as such. And it's a sort of almost overly romantic, but it really does sum up the album as a whole as the film of my love. Again, coming back into the filmic idea. Co-starring you and co-starring me, starring us together. The film of my love will travel the world, will travel forever and ever. A backlot romance, a scripted affair, the screenplay a blessing from heaven. We're gone with the wind, see, film reference, or on the Orient Express to join the Magnificent Seven. I think those are great lyrics. So to conclude, on the whole for this album, 10cc used a lot of instruments on this album. So on A Brand New Day, Lol plays the gizmo, which was this contraption that they attached to a guitar that Kevin and Lol invented and then they marketed. I'm not a guitar player, so I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but it's very interesting to look up anyway. And then on the track Flying Junk as well, they also use an auto harp. Now, I love auto harps. They've just got such a distinctive quality about them. And they start and end this track with an auto harp, I believe. And again, it gives it a sort of very dreamlike texture. But the standout thing from this album, I must say, is that all of this, and we always forget this as music producers with music production, even as consumers, we forget this. This was all done on reel-to-reel tape. This was before the days of digital technology, and it's amazing what they achieved doing this album, the sounds they got out of it, because these were really difficult sounds to get. These were certainly not very quick. These took a lot of time, a lot of hours, and a lot of patience to get these sounds together, especially on the track I'm Not in Love. And it's something that today could be done quite easily. So it just shows how many hours would have been put into, and you can say this for any album, I guess, but how many hours would have been put into this album. And again, all the artwork, look at this. It's It's beautiful. I mean, I love a lot of these 70s artwork covers. They're just so striking, and that's what I get from this album. And I think it's such a brilliant album, and I think it lives on today. It's one of these albums that everyone remembers today. Because once you've heard it, you don't forget it. And that's not something you can say about all albums. This is something that is, it's timeless. You can't, it's one of these, especially I'm Not in Love, it could have been made at any point, because it feels so modern even by today's standards, the effects they've used, and yeah, I love it. So, thank you for listening. So that was today's album, 10cc's original soundtrack. Thank you very much for listening to everyone. And next week on my album reviews, I will be doing this album, Close to the Edge by Yes. So I'm really looking forward to this one. This is going to be really good. So thank you so much again for listening. And I will be back same time, same place next week. Bye everyone, and keep tuned for all my other things and everything else I'm doing. I should have some news very soon on other developments that I'm doing in terms of my composition. Exciting times! Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this review. And why not check out some of my other videos too?